Manchester United have sacked Rúben Amorim.
Manchester United have sacked their head coach. On Monday, January 5th, 2026, the club let Ruben Amorim go, just 14 months after bringing him in. They're sitting 6th, already 17 points behind Arsenal, and the dream everyone bought into last year feels like it happened in a different lifetime. But this one hit differently. There was no slow unraveling, no whispered rumors that built for weeks. This felt sudden, messy, and personal, like something snapped that couldn't be fixed quietly, because just a day before, after a frustrating 1-1 draw at Leeds, Amorim stepped in front of the cameras and said something you almost never hear from a manager at United when things are falling apart. "I'm the manager, so not just the coach," he said, making it clear he didn't come to Old Trafford to follow orders from upstairs.
I noticed that you receive selective information. I came here to be the manager of Manchester United, not to be the coach of Manchester United. And that is clear. I know that my name is not Tuchel, is not Conte, is not Mourinho, but I'm the manager of Manchester United.
He came to lead, and behind the scenes, the story was already being written in ways the board couldn't ignore. Last season ended with United finishing 15th in the league, a collapse so bad it felt like the club had hit rock bottom. Europe kept hope alive for a while, until they lost the Europa League final 1-0 to Tottenham, and suddenly almost became the most painful word at the club. Then came this season, a fresh start, around £250 million spent, new players, new energy, new promises, and yet United still looked caught between two worlds. Not wild enough to be exciting, not organized enough to be great. That's why the fan base felt so divided. Some blamed Amorim. The football just wasn't getting better fast enough. Others pointed at the structure. How can a head coach build anything real when he doesn't have real power? And then there were the ones in the middle, tired and confused, asking the question no one at the club wants to hear. If United keep changing managers, why does it always end the same way? Because today wasn't really about the results. It was about power, about who gets to choose the players, about who decides the direction, and about what happens when a manager stops playing along and starts pushing back, especially in January, when patience is thin and pressure is everywhere. So the question now isn't just why didn't it work with Amorim? The real question is, what did he run into at Manchester United that made this impossible? And why does this keep happening? When Manchester United appointed Ruben Amorim on November 1st, 2024, they didn't frame it as just another managerial gamble. They framed it as something bigger, a shift in how the club would operate. United's official announcement didn't call him manager. They called him head coach on a contract running until June 2027 with an option for one more year. He'd start a bit late, November 11th, so he could wrap things up at Sporting first. That language wasn't accidental. It told you exactly what United thought they were getting. Not another Alex Ferguson, some all-powerful figure controlling every corner of the club. A coach who'd fit into a modern setup, someone who'd work within the Ineos-led football department where decisions about signings, squad planning, and long-term direction were supposed to happen above him. But here's the thing, United didn't hire Amorim because they wanted a head coach. They hired him because he looked like someone who could finally give this club an identity again. The why was simple. United wanted control, not chaos. For years, United's biggest problem wasn't even the losses. It was that every week felt like watching a different team. One match they'd press high with energy. The next, they'd sit deep and defend for their lives. One game they'd build patiently from the back. The next, it was long balls and desperation. Even when they won, it often felt like they'd survived rather than dominated. So when United went after Amorim, the appeal was obvious. At Sporting, he'd built something consistent, patterns you could see every week, in possession, in pressing, in how they moved into space. There was discipline, but also aggression. He didn't just win matches, he created a style people could recognize from kickoff, and he did it at a club that couldn't just outspend everyone. Sporting had to be smart, develop players, recruit with purpose, build a clear pathway from scouting to success. Amorim helped end their long title drought and turned them into a modern, tactically sharp side. That's what United bought into. Not just, we got a good coach, we got a system. The tactical promise, a United side with a spine. Amorim's philosophy wasn't some mystery. His principles were clear. A stable base shape, usually a back three with wing backs, aggressive pressing with clear triggers, controlled build-up through structured passing, and attackers designed to exploit the half spaces, not just hug the touchline. In theory, that was perfect for where United were, because a club with an unstable squad doesn't just need better players, it needs a framework that reduces the chaos. chaos, a system that makes average performances survivable instead of catastrophic. That's what United thought they were getting, a coach who could make them predictable in the best way possible. But here's where the first cracks appeared. United's squad wasn't built for one idea, it was built for about 5 different ones. Years of scattered recruitment had left them with players who didn't quite fit together, some who thrived in transition, some who needed possession, some who were built to defend deep, and others who needed freedom instead of structure. Amorim's system depends on everyone being on the same page, especially at the back and in midfield. Your wingbacks need clarity, your center backs need confidence defending wide areas, your midfield needs timing, your attacking players need chemistry and discipline when pressing. That takes time, and United, even when they say they want time, don't actually behave like a club that offers it, because the moment things get shaky, the conversation shifts from building something to surviving the week. This is where United's story becomes different from most big club sackings, because the problems weren't just about what was happening on the pitch, they were structural. Amorim came in as a head coach, meaning he was supposed to coach and implement, while the people above him controlled recruitment and the bigger decisions. But as time went on, he started pushing back against that setup, and that pushback wasn't a small thing. It became the tension that eventually tore everything apart. We know now that his downfall was tied to a power struggle, specifically over transfers and how much authority he actually had. The executives made it clear the hierarchy wasn't going to flip just because the coach wanted it to. In other words, United wanted a coach to manage the team. Amorim wanted to be the person who set the direction. Those two things can coexist, but only if results buy you patience. And results didn't buy patience. The first season was a disaster by United's own standards. Amorim's first full season at United didn't just disappoint, it became a crisis. United finished 15th in the 2024/25 Premier League with 42 points. That's not just mid-table mediocrity, that's reputational damage. A club like Manchester United doesn't carry a 15th place finish as some normal step in a rebuild. It becomes part of your identity, a stain that doesn't wash off. And yes, Europe offered a way out. United reached the Europa League final in Bilbao, only to lose 1-0 to Tottenham. That match wasn't just a final, it was everything. Win it, and maybe the season gets reframed as painful but ultimately okay. Lose it, and the league collapse becomes the only story that matters. They lost, and that loss didn't just cost them a trophy, it cemented the feeling that Amorim's United could compete, but couldn't close, that they could work hard, but not dominate, that they were always just short of being convincing. Then came the rebuild, and the pressure got heavier. United backed him in the transfer market, not cautiously, aggressively. So by the time the 2025/26 season kicked off, the excuses were running out. When you spend like that, you can't keep saying give it time forever. At some point, the club and the fans need to see real change, clearer patterns, more consistent performances, results that don't feel fragile every week. Instead, what followed was a season that hovered in limbo. United improved enough to sit 6th, but not enough to feel like they were heading somewhere. The gap to the top was brutal, 17 points behind Arsenal when he got sacked, and they'd won just once in their last 5 matches. That's the danger zone for a project manager. You're not failing badly enough to be written off immediately, but you're not convincing anyone either. And then there were results that don't just hurt the table, they hurt belief. A Carabao Cup exit to League 2 side Grimsby Town after a 2-2 draw in a marathon penalty shootout was the kind of embarrassment that doesn't go away. Even if you can't explain one upset, the bigger problem is what it signals. A team that still isn't stable, a system that still isn't protecting them when it matters. And once that perception takes hold, every draw becomes louder than it should be. Here's the core issue. Amorim wasn't hired to manage emotions or lift moods. He was hired to build control. But the more the pressure grew, the more United reverted to what they always become in these moments, a club pulling in different directions. The coach pushing for authority and football clarity, the hierarchy protecting its structure and power, the squad caught between old habits and new demands, the fan base split between blaming the tactics and blaming the people above. And that's why the end didn't look like a normal sacking, it looked like a breaking point. Because on Sunday, January 4th, after a 1-1 draw at Leeds, Amorim didn't sound like a head coach working inside a system. system. He sounded like a manager challenging it.
I came here to be the manager of Manchester United, not to be the coach. And every department, the scouting department, the sport director needs to do their job. I will do mine for 18 months and then we move on.
He made it clear he didn't come to Old Trafford to follow instructions. He came to run the football side of things. Less than 24 hours later, he was gone.
Manchester United have sacked Rúben Amorim.
And that's where chapter 1 ends, because the story stops being about why it didn't work and becomes something sharper. If a club hires a coach for structure, backs him with £165 million, survives a 15th place collapse, loses a European final, and still sacks him after 14 months, then the real issue isn't tactics, it's alignment. What comes next explains how the results, the recruitment battles, and the power struggle all came together into the one thing a coach can't survive at Manchester United: the moment when the people in charge and the manager stop pretending they want the same thing. If the first part of this story was about why Ruben Amorim got hired, then this is about when the whole thing stopped feeling like a project. Not because everything fell apart overnight, but because the margin for error just disappeared. Late December doesn't usually destroy teams, it reveals them. When the fixtures pile up, injuries mount, and training sessions become nothing more than recovery sessions, every flaw you've been hiding gets dragged into the light. Patterns start to blur. You're rotating players constantly. Control becomes nearly impossible to hold on to. And for Manchester United, that stretch didn't just damage the results. It changed the entire conversation around Amorim, his authority, his system, whether any of this was actually moving forward. Across their final 5 matches under Ruben Amorim, United managed just 5 points from a possible 15. 1 win, 3 draws, 1 loss, 8 goals scored, 8 goals conceded. On paper, that's not disaster territory. At Manchester United, it's a full-blown alarm. The turning point came at Old Trafford. United 4, Bournemouth 4. This was the match that laid everything bare. United were brilliant going forward. 17 shots, over 2.4 expected goals, 30 touches in the opposition box, wave after wave of pressure. In isolation, those are the numbers of a dominant team. But the scoreboard told a completely different story. 4 goals scored, 4 goals conceded. It wasn't bad luck, it was game management, or the complete absence of it. United could attack, they could overwhelm you, they could build momentum and look unstoppable, but they couldn't close games. Every time they pushed ahead, they left themselves wide open on the break. The distance between players stretched too far, their defensive cover vanished, and Bournemouth punished them over and over. That match planted a dangerous idea in people's heads. This team could hurt opponents, but it couldn't protect itself. The next blow came away at Villa Park. Aston Villa 2, United 1. The result hurt, but the injury hurt more. Bruno Fernandes, United's captain and the player who makes everything tick, picked up a muscle injury. The one who connects the team, controls the tempo, drags them through chaos. Suddenly gone. From that moment on, Amorim's decisions weren't just tactical anymore. They were defensive. Without Bruno, United's build-up slowed down, their pressing lost its sharpness, late-game composure evaporated, and suddenly, rotation wasn't about strategy, it was about survival. Boxing Day brought some relief on the scoreboard. United 1, Newcastle 0, but it was an uneasy kind of relief. The goal came from Patrick Dorgu, and United held on. And that phrase matters. Held on. This wasn't a performance that screamed, "We've turned a corner." It felt like a team protecting what they had rather than imposing themselves. United climbed the table, briefly, but nothing about that match answered the questions raised by Bournemouth and Villa. It paused the criticism. It didn't stop it. Then came Wolves at home, a team sitting at the very bottom of the table. United took the lead, and once again, they couldn't finish it off. The 1-1 draw wasn't a disaster on its own, but context is everything. Wolves were struggling. Old Trafford expected control. Instead, United conceded and looked shaky. After the match, Amorim admitted he wouldn't risk anyone physically. That one line told you everything about where United were. This was no longer a team rotating to stay sharp. This was a team managing its own fragility. And then came Leeds away, the last match, a 1-1 draw that somehow felt heavier than most defeats. United equalized through Matheus Cunha. Joshua Zirkzee came off the bench and set it up. Cunha had another goal ruled out for offside and hit the post. On another day, United might have won comfortably, but this wasn't about fine margins anymore, because that draw extended a brutal stat. United had now conceded in 15 consecutive away Premier League games. their worst run since the mid-1980s. That's not form, that's an identity crisis. A club that used to pride itself on being able to win anywhere was now expected to leak goals everywhere. Across those matches, three things became impossible to ignore. 1. Control vanished late in games Leeds weren't safe. Pressure wasn't managed. The structure cracked whenever intensity dipped. 2. Injuries removed the safety net. Without Fernandez and with others being carefully managed, Amorim's system lost its conductor, and the margin for error disappeared completely. 3. Rotation stopped being strategic. Lineups changed because they had to, not because they should. Partnerships never had time to settle. The chemistry broke down. This wasn't a meltdown, it was worse. It was stagnation under pressure, and at Manchester United, stagnation doesn't buy you patience. It invites questions about power. By the time the Leeds match ended, the fan base wasn't asking, can this get better? They were asking, who's really in control here? Because once results stop being convincing and performances stop being reassuring, attention always shifts upward, from what's happening on the pitch to the people making the decisions off it. That's when football problems become political ones, and that's exactly what happened next. By the time Manchester United walked off the pitch at Ellen Road, the festive period had already changed the entire mood around the club. Not because United were collapsing in some dramatic fashion, but because the season had entered the most dangerous phase for any manager trying to build something. The phase where the football saws answering the questions people are asking. United's final 5 games under Rúben Amorim produced a record that doesn't look catastrophic on paper. 1 win, 3 draws, 1 loss, with 8 goals scored and 8 conceded. But buried in that run were 2 truths that don't sit comfortably together at a club like Manchester United. The team couldn't hold on to control when it mattered, and the manager stopped playing along with the role he'd been given. That combination doesn't just create pressure, it creates instability. The defining moment wasn't a defeat, it was a sentence. The Leeds match itself was tight and frustrating. Leeds won, United won. Brendan Aronson scored first. Matheus Cunha equalized soon after, set up by Joshua Zirkzee coming off the bench. Cunha also had a goal ruled out for offside and hit the post. The kind of details that make a draw feel like a missed chance, not a disaster. But what really set everything off happened after the final whistle. In the press conference, Amorim didn't sound like a head coach trying to ride out a rough patch. He sounded like someone drawing a line in the sand. He made it clear he was the manager, not just the coach. And he said bluntly, I'm not going to quit.
I came here to be the manager of Manchester United, not to be the coach of Manchester United, and that is clear.
That wasn't just frustration talking, that was a public statement about power. And at a club operating under a modern hierarchy, where the coach is supposed to fit into a structure, that kind of public statement is a direct challenge to the people above him. The next morning, United sacked him. The club's reasoning? United were sitting 17 points behind Arsenal, and leadership decided they needed a change to salvage the rest of the season. They pointed out that United had won just once in their last 5 matches. And that's the key moment in this story. The week United lost trust in Amorim wasn't a week where they got battered 4-0. It was a week where their manager stopped sounding like someone who worked for the club and started sounding like someone fighting against it. The pressure multiplier, a historic away record, even when United weren't losing, they were leaking goals. The Leeds draw extended a stat that carried real weight. United had now conceded in 15 consecutive away Premier League matches, their worst run since 1985/86. That matters because it changes how every away game feels. When you know you're going to concede, away matches stop being, can we win this? And become, how long until they score? And once that expectation sets in, with the team, with the fans, with everyone watching, control becomes almost impossible to maintain. This isn't just about points anymore, it's about belief. Rotation wasn't a philosophy anymore, it was damage control. Now here's the part that made Amorim's decisions feel so contradictory. On the surface, all the rotation made sense. United were stretched thin, they were managing problems, not fine-tuning a system. Going into the Leeds period, key players were missing. Bruno Fernandes, Harry Maguire, Bryan Mbeumo among them. That left Amorim relying on less experienced options, trying to patch things together. And the issue here isn't just that players were unavailable, it's who those players were. Fernandes is the tempo, the leadership, the creativity, all in one. Maguire is the organizer in a defense that desperately needed organizing. Mbeumo is the direct threat, the outlet when things get tight, the kind of player you lean on when your structure starts wobbling. When those pillars are missing, most managers simplify things. Fewer changes, fewer experiments, fewer moving parts. But for United, the fixture congestion and injury issues issues forced constant reshuffling, and that reshuffling ran headfirst into the most demanding part of Amorim's system because his football isn't built on improvisation, it's built on timing. If your partnerships keep changing, timing falls apart, and once timing falls apart, you start seeing exactly what United were showing in this stretch. Games played in fragments instead of with full control, a team that could create chances but couldn't suffocate opponents, and late game moments where everything felt reactive instead of controlled. Even the one win during this period, 1-0 against Newcastle with Patrick Dorgu scoring, was described as United holding on for an ugly victory. At the time, they climbed to 5th with 29 points after 18 games. That's not the language of a team finding its rhythm, that's the language of a team clinging to results. The boardroom layer, why form became a control issue. This is where United's story becomes uniquely United. Today's reporting framed Amorim's dismissal as the endpoint of a power struggle, specifically over transfers, January policy, and how much authority he actually had. Those tensions had strained his relationships with key people in leadership. This is the critical part. Once results stopped giving him cover, the real fight became about governance, not football. United had already backed him heavily in the summer, around £165 million net spend on players like Benjamin Šeško, Brian Mbeumo, and Matheus Cunha. So now the internal question at the club wasn't just, are we good enough? It was, if we've spent this much and we're still not stable, and the coach is publicly demanding more control, what happens next? That's why Amorim's press conference after Leeds was so explosive. It wasn't just a manager venting after dropping points. It was the manager declaring he expected to run things like a traditional manager, while the club's entire structure was designed to prevent exactly that. The trust break. There's one final detail that explains why this didn't feel like a normal bad run sacking. United had actually lost just one of their last 8 games and were sitting 6th, just 3 points off 4th place when the decision came down. That's why this story isn't called the collapse. It's called when control slipped, because the club didn't just decide the football wasn't improving fast enough. They decided the situation had crossed a line where the relationship couldn't be salvaged. A fragile month of performances, a historic run of conceding in every away game, and a head coach publicly redefining what his job was supposed to be. Once that happens, every meeting becomes a negotiation, every team selection becomes a statement, every January transfer conversation becomes a test of who actually has the power, and that's not sustainable for any manager, not at United, not under this structure. By the time Amorim said, "I'm the manager, not just the coach," the story stopped being about a 1-1 draw at Leeds. It became about whether Manchester United's hierarchy would be seen backing down. They didn't. Manchester United didn't sack Rúben Amorim because of one draw, one injury, or one bad month. They sacked him because a line was crossed. A season that hovered between promise and fragility collided with a public challenge to authority. The football wasn't convincing enough to demand patience, and the structure wasn't flexible enough to absorb defiance. When those two realities met, the decision became inevitable. This wasn't a failure of ideas, it was a failure of alignment. At Manchester United, results can buy time, silence can buy patience, but once power is questioned out loud, the hierarchy always answers. What happens next will reveal more than this sacking ever could. Not just about the next coach, but about who truly controls the direction of the club.